Being 8:45, we'll call the meeting to order. Pursuant to the order of reference of Wednesday, June the 1st, 2016, Bill C-210, an act to amend the national anthem, will now be dealt with by this committee. The summary of the bill is that this enactment amends the national anthem to substitute the words "of us" for the words "thy sons" in the English version of the national anthem, and this therefore makes the national anthem gender neutral. Now, we have between 8:45 and 9:45, we have one witness to speak to this bill, so we will deal with the witness, Mr. Champion of the Dorchester Review. Welcome.
Thank you.
Chair, before we begin, if I could, on a point of privilege or point of order, when I was in the midst of speaking and you put the question, which as we know is contrary to the rules, I was outlining that there were a number of witnesses who wished to appear here, and my concern was that if we proceeded with the very, very unusual and compressed time frame that had been contemplated or in the motion, that we would not be able to accommodate some of those witnesses. That is indeed the case. Among those that I'm aware of, and there may be many, many more out in this country who aren't aware that this was coming to committee, but among those who were not able to be accommodated were the grandson of Stanley Weir, the composer of O Canada, who has views on this and wishes to be heard. His wife, as I understand it, is ill in hospital, and on such short notice, he was not able to accommodate us, even by teleconference. Similarly, Rudyard Griffiths is another individual I know who wished to come and present to this committee, a well-known historian, founder of the Dominion Institute, I think a very distinguished and respected individual on questions such as this, also unable to be accommodated. So I hope at the end of this witness we will have a willingness to consider, since first of all the motion was put inappropriately under our rules, but also because it has effectively prevented Canadians from being able to participate, reconsider that concept and consider opening it up to further witnesses at future meetings.
Thank you. I think the alacrity with which everyone is dealing with this bill, as you well know, Mr. Van Loan, has to do with the health of the mover of this bill, and his health is indeed critical, and we need to deal with this bill as soon as possible.
Yes, and I have the greatest of regard for that and the greatest concern for that. However, that is not a basis on which public policy is made, especially public policy on an institution or a symbol that belongs to all Canadians. It should be made on the questions of policy related to that particular matter, and it should not be an opportunity to shorten a process and deny Canadians the opportunity to have their say, deny the Canadians the opportunity to have input into it. And that is essentially the consequence of what that motion did, which motion, I might add once again, was put improperly under our rules, in which you cannot put a motion while someone is speaking on the floor, Madam Chair.
Mr. Van Loan, I don't think we will revisit this. The committee spoke, the committee made its decision and supported the chair's ruling, and so we will move on now. This was duly voted by a majority in the House of Commons, and so we are now dealing with the bill, having had it decided on by a majority in the House of Commons. So basically, I'm going to begin. I will indeed introduce Mr. Champion again, welcome him, and say, Mr. Champion, you have 10 minutes to speak to the issue.
Yes.
And then there will be some questions for you.
Okay.
By the members.
I'll just, not having testified before, I'll just do a voice check. Is this volume sufficient if I'm speaking like this? No? Louder? Okay. All right. I haven't it's been about a year since I've lectured, so my voice is out of practice. So good morning. My name is Chris Champion. I'm a Canadian historian with a PhD in Canadian history. The volume is good? Thank you. I'm the founder and editor of the Dorchester Review, which is an independent and relatively small circulation journal, but it's about 100 pages per issue, so it's in the old style of those journals that John A. Macdonald and Wilfrid Laurier used to read in the library, as a journal of history and also historical commentary, which is a little bit unique. We are dedicated to the proposition that history is not for dummies. We have about 1,000 readers, just under, and they're spread across every province and territory. One of our newest subscribers is the Bibliothèque de l'Assemblée nationale du Québec. which subscribed yesterday. This, I must say, I think shows the wit and wisdom of the librarians of the National Assembly. Car ton bras sait porter l'épée, il sait porter la croix. These are the words, the true words, of O Canada. O Canada, terre de nos aïeux. Sir George Etienne Cartier sang another O Canada, Mon pays, mes amours, the one he wrote in 1834 during the Confederation meetings. The story is that he sang with fellow delegates from Montreal and Quebec the words drifting across the peaceful waters of Charlottetown Bay. It is said he sang with tears in his eyes, for it was a moment of triumph as well as tragedy, death as well as new birth. Quebec could not be a freestanding country, but it would regain its own elected assembly, which had been lost as a consequence of the rebellion of 1837. Cartier sang with tears because Quebec, the old British province created in 1763, was to be reborn as a nation in all but name, an old country within a new country. You see, O Canada, both Cartier's and Routier's later song of the same name, is their song. These are songs of the national survival of French Canadians, and they reach back to Champlain, Laval, Sister Mary of the Incarnation, and Dollard des Ormeau's Battle of the Long Sault on the Ottawa River. That is where O Canada really comes from. 400 years of history. Shakespeare said, if music be the food of love, play on. And the greatest music, John Senior wrote, is the music of words singing in our heart. That is, of poetry, literature, and history, Madam Chair. Car ton bras sait porter l'épée, il sait porter la croix. As English Canadians, we have to admit that it's not really our song. And this is why, historically, French Canadian nationalists saw English Canadians, descendants of the old Ontario governing military and Protestant clerical elite, as more than a little crass and bumptious to be taking their song, tinkering with the words, and making it our national anthem. Didn't we have songs of our own? Couldn't we just sing the Maple Leaf Forever and leave their song alone? So I think we should try to remember this when we are talking about the English version of O Canada. Some people have said there was something, with all due respect, a little bit spurious about it all along. There were many attempts to put O Canada into English, at least 18 translations before the First World War, full of patriotic and religious fervor, Madam Chair. Many of those who tried were clergy of the Anglican or Methodist tradition, which was totally steeped, in which the country was totally steeped on the English-Canadian side in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Robert Stanley Weers was only one of these versions. People back then knew full well that in English literature, going back to Shakespeare and the authorized Bible, in the music of Handel, in the hymns that almost all English Canadians sang for almost 200 years, the word sons, properly understood in context, commonly did not refer only to men. The first lines of Handel's great oratorio, Joshua, for example, are these: Ye sons of Israel, every tribe attend, let grateful songs and hymns to heaven ascend. This refers to all the people of Israel, mothers, fathers, daughters, sons, whom Joshua led to the promised land in the story. Likewise, in Malachi's prophecy that the Savior will come, for I am the Lord, I change not. Therefore, ye sons of Jacob are not consumed. Ye sons of Jacob refers to all the people waiting in hope. and previous generations of Canadians knew this. Because Canadians used to learn these stories in school. It was part of their cultural formation, so they would know where our society came from, what it means to be a free people, what it means to have rights and responsibilities, what it means to be a Canadian citizen. When these well-formed Canadian women and girls sang O Canada, they understood what the words meant. It seems that many people today do not understand. And because they don't understand, they seek to change. But seek first to understand, St. Francis taught. Some have pointed out that Weir originally wrote the line as, "Thou dost in us command." True. Thou dost in us, dustiness. It's no wonder he changed it. It sounds like we need a vacuum cleaner. Madam Chair, the words "in us," given the rich tradition that we come from, the words "in us" sounded flat to Weir, the poet, and they sound flat, in my view, today. The "in all of us" is rather banal for a national anthem. As a friend of mine says, they are changing poetry into mere doggerel. It is inferior and insipid language. In fact, a quick quotation search turns up only one example of "in all of us," and that is in the grunge singer Kurt Cobain's suicide note. Try it. So when Robert Weir fixed that line, being a good poet, he elevated the language and he improved the poem. And it has stood the test of time. 100 years is not bad in modern English-Canadian terms. And moreover, it is rooted in 3,000 years of tradition handed down from the
2
Jews
minutes, Mr. Champion.
to our ancestors. Yes. Sorry?
I said 2 minutes.
Sorry?
No, you have 2 more minutes left.
2 minutes? Okay,
Yeah.
well, now I have 1.5. Thank you, Madam Chair. It has stood the test of time. Generations of Canadians have memorized it. It has become part of who we are, to quote Rudyard Griffith. Heritage is sometimes compared to a rich tapestry. Once you begin pulling at loose threads, you start to pick away at the image, and the beauty unravels until you have, eventually, nothing left. Madam Chair, what these ladies and gentlemen are proposing is a mistake. It should be common sense. It should be common sense that you simply don't change heritage because it's heritage. You don't change heritage on a whim because, watch out, somebody else can come along and have another whim. You are setting a precedent for pulling out the threads. You are tearing open the cloth. I'm sure they have good intentions, but they are getting short-term satisfaction and doing long-term harm. And of course, then your motto becomes "Je me souviens peu," or "Je ne me souviens non plus." You are telling the world we are a superficial people, perhaps even lightweights. And once the tinkering begins, who can say we will not wake up and find there is a new national anthem every time we open our daily newspaper? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Champion. And now we have a part of the committee hearings where you get questions from members. And this is a 7-minute round, and I shall begin with Ms. de Brussen for the Liberals.
Bonjour et merci pour votre témoignage.
Hello, and thank you for your statements, your testimony. I am a member of Parliament and the mother of 2 daughters. I feel it's very important to discuss our national anthem and to discuss our history. So I agree that we do need to look back over our history when we discuss this matter.
And in 1908, it was "True Patriot Love, Thou Dost in Us Command," which, as you said dustiness. I hear me in those words. I have to say, it includes me. But the words were changed. When I look at it, and I'll get to my question because it's important we consider this. It looks like originally, if you look at the Canadian Encyclopedia, in 1913, there was a version that was published that had "Thy Son's Command," and then there was a copyright in 1914 for that wording. But there's no indication. We don't actually have anything from the writer to tell us why he made those changes. Nothing about a change about poetry, nothing about the need to consider any other issues. We don't know. We don't know. And that's important. So I think we need to take a look at the snapshot of what was going on in 1913, 1914, because if we're going to consider history. And I'd like you to comment on that when we get there. At that point, the suffrage movement was becoming very active. So in 1912, there was a Political Equality League that had formed. Nellie McClung was one of its members. And in 1914, they launched a play called The Women of Parliament. And that was very funny because, in fact, women couldn't be in Parliament. If we were having this discussion at that time, I wouldn't be here. So they were taking this play on the road to get people to think about it. And so then women did get the right to vote about 4 years after the copyrighted change. First time some women in this country were allowed to vote federally was in 1918. And then in 1921 was the first time that some women in this country were not only able to vote, but to be elected. And this is important to my personal history when I'm looking at this, because the first female MP elected in 1921 was Agnes MacPhail. And she is from East York, which is part of my riding. So that's my history and a women's history when we're looking at that, but also a very important part of Canadian history. And that means a lot to me when we're going to take some time to think about what we're doing here and looking at this, the national anthem. So we look at today, we have parity in cabinet. That's a great change, but women only make 26% of the House of Commons, so there's still a long way to go. Taking a snapshot, 1913 to 1914, very tumultuous time when we were looking at the suffrage movement. You didn't quite raise it, but I've heard another argument about why we should have Thy Son's Command being related to the First World War. And that's an interesting piece because in 1913, we weren't at war yet, but if we get to 1914 and we consider our involvement in the war, women were also involved in World War I. That's an important part of Canadian history. So 3,141 Canadian nurses served in the Canadian Army Medical Corps. And in fact, 46 of them gave their lives in the line of duty. So in fact, women also died serving this country during World War I. So I have a strong respect for history and women's participation in the First World War as well. And when we want to take a look at where we are now, women are actively involved in our military and in serving our country. And that's something for which I think we need to show quite a bit of respect. So
3 minutes.
The question is, thank you. So my question is, because I'm looking at this and I'm taking into account this history. Where were we? We were looking at the women's suffrage movement and an active time when we were talking about including women. We're talking about a change that happened at least in first editions before the First World War, then changed after. And I look at what am I going to tell my daughters when I go home today about what we're proposing and what the discussions that we're having here in Parliament today in 2016 about our national anthem. These are two girls who every day in school sing the national anthem. They're proud Canadians. And so looking at this, what you're proposing is an objection to amending back to the original version, really, the wording of our national anthem to make it inclusive of all genders. I want to know, what do I tell them about the fact that a historian came to Parliament and testified today that in order to honor our history, we need to exclude them? And if I can add to that, because I would be really interested in hearing your answer to this, how do I explain to my daughters that their true patriot love is not relevant to our country. Thank you.
Well, Madam Chair, I think you would be misinforming your daughters if you told them that that was the case, and so would their teachers, because, as I said fairly clearly in my opening remarks, the words "thy sons" are not exclusive in the context of our tradition. It may be that in schools nowadays, people are not taught much about that deeper tradition, and therefore when they see "O Canada," they think, hang on here, there's something wrong with this. This is sexist. This is not gender neutral. But that's simply a lack of well-rooted education in our culture and history. And the equality of women and men is extremely important. But if this change is supposed to advance equality, it won't do much. How much will it really accomplish? In fact, nothing. Because if we look at 500 years of our literature in English again, because we're talking about the English version, we're talking about poetry. And the word sons has, in this type of context, never referred only to men. I quoted Handel's Joshua and other texts, which used to be extremely familiar to Canadians. If Canadians are not familiar with them now, that's unfortunate, and it explains why a superficial change like this could be seen to be meaningful, when really it isn't. It's merely making inferior poetry, lower quality poetry.
Thank you, Mr. Champion. And now I go to Mr. Van Loan. From the Conservatives. 7 minutes, Mr. Van Loan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In my address in the Commons on this, in my speech in the Commons, I reviewed national anthems in a couple of countries like Russia and Germany that have undergone frequent changes. There are places where institute symbols and national anthems endure for a long period of time. There are other countries in which they tend to frequently be changed and rewritten. Why would you characterize the difference, and how would you characterize the difference between those two kinds of countries, those that often change their symbols and totems, and those who keep and maintain them over time?
Well, thanks for the question, Madam Chair. It represents the tradition that we come from. We in Canada have the privilege of being part of, I guess, a group of countries like Australia, like the United States, like India and New Zealand, other places, many that you can count in the Commonwealth, Trinidad and Jamaica and places, where the tradition is very deeply rooted. We have a very stable political system. Normally, these countries have retained their parliamentary institutions intact, their mode of electing members, and so on. And I think that, and I have not done the comparison, but I think if you lined them up, you would probably find that those countries with a stable political system would tend to make fewer superficial changes of this nature, knowing that the tradition kind of hangs together. It's an organic whole in a sense. And when you eliminate the phrase, "in all thy sons command," I think you're erasing a piece of our collective memory, because tradition cannot be established from above by fiat. It has to grow from the ground up in people's psyche, and it takes time for that to develop into tradition. George Orwell wrote that he who controls the present controls the past. He who controls the past controls the future, and that's why he had a Ministry of Truth, whose job was to change history, to change the history books, the newspapers, movies, radio. I haven't read the book in a long time, but maybe the Ministry of Truth even changed the national anthem.
Our government, our Conservative government, in a throne speech, proposed the idea of returning to the "Thou dost in us" command, and there was an extraordinarily negative public reaction to that. You talked there about the impact of changing these symbols. Why do you think we had such a negative public reaction to that proposal?
I think it's a simple matter of people's familiarity. You know, when you talk to new Canadians, they tend to like and want to attach to the traditions that we have. There's a sense that new Canadians want to know who we are. They want to know what they're joining. They want to know who we are together and integrate and attach. And they want to feel proud, and they want to know why. And if they see us constantly picking away at our own heritage, I think they'll find no fixed term of reference. And we start to look as if we don't know where we came from. It's rather like poetry. We memorize poetry by repetition. But if the words keep changing, we'll never be able to learn them.
You mentioned a bit about legitimacy in the sense of lack of legitimacy if politicians are making these decisions top-down. If that is being done, particularly in a context where the rules of our democratic institutions, such as this committee on how it should operate, are broken, if the opportunity for public input is denied, we're sitting here debating this less than 24 hours after a decision was made in Parliament to send it to us. I can tell you probably an overwhelming majority of Canadians do not even know that this committee is occurring, that there would be any opportunity to have their say. When institutions are changed in that fashion, ignoring our democratic rules and ignoring our democratic institutions, top down by politicians, what does that do to the legitimacy of these symbols, and how will that affect Canadians' attitudes towards them?
Well, Madam Chair, I really am struck by the arrogance of what members are proposing to do in this bill. They're taking something that is 100 years old, that is a classic poem by a Canadian poet. Normally we respect our poets and their work. In fact, we support them. And in place of that, we're imposing the ephemeral present-day preoccupations and anxieties on it. Now, in the future, let us hope that the population is perhaps better educated in our tradition. They wouldn't have this anxiety about the national anthem. They wouldn't have this kind of angst, psychic angst about it, because they would know what the words meant. I think what is happening here is quick and dirty. How many Canadians really know it's happening, I think, is a legitimate question. It's going through so precipitately, please spell that correctly in the record, precipitately, that I doubt very many people are aware or really understand the change. And we have to note that Canadian governments historically, and I can only speak to you as a Canadian historian, have a track record of changing our heritage without consulting Canadians, without ensuring a wide consensus. When the Canadian flag was adopted in 1964, there was considerable public debate, but it was passed with a majority of English Canadians opposed, and most French Canadians indifferent. You can read my book, which documents both. Even then, the government of the day used closure to impose it. Now, 50 years have passed, and we all love the flag, don't get me wrong, but the way it was done was quick and dirty. Likewise, Dominion Day was changed to Canada Day in 1982 by a snap vote in the House of Commons when there was no quorum. There were only 13 members present. And if you read the record, most people were not aware of what was happening in the House. It was a sneaky move behind closed doors, a fait accompli. And so there's a bit of a track record of this behind closed doors, kind of sneaky, quick and dirty changes to our heritage, which I think, you know, for maybe for good sentimental motivations, for good personal motives, I think is being done here. But I think that personal motives and personal affection and regard for one member is not a good basis on which to make such a historic change to something that is so familiar and rooted in our tradition.
Thank you, Mr. Champion. And we now go to Mr. McGregor for the New Democrats for 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And with respect to Dr. Champion, I sincerely thank him for appearing as a witness today. I have no questions for the witness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Champion. And then we go to the Liberals. We do not have a Liberal name here. And I think that we do not have any.
I have a comment to make based on the presentation.
Will you be the next Liberal speaker?
I just have a comment, and then I have no question, but yes. I have a comment based on the presentation. I feel a need to express myself.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Champion, for your information. And as an historian, of course, you come with a lot of history, and I respect history very much. But I do need to say that, you know, today's decision will be history in the future. And when we say, I look at that picture on the wall, and that pretty well tells me a lot of things. That how could they come out with the words instead of sons, ladies, when there were none there present? That is very, very difficult to imagine. And that also plays into what is history and tradition. Quick and dirty is a term you used in answering, and it doesn't mean because it's quick that it's not right and it's not proper and it's not the way to do business. And as much as I respect all individuals that have spoken about this, when I see that all 5 parties in the House of Commons yesterday, who are elected by all Canadians across this nation, have supported, it's not just the Liberal Party, all 5 parties, if I understand, if the Bloc voted, and I believe they did, all 5 parties together, forming the majority, has voted in favor of this change, because this change is where we are as a nation today. And in 50 years' time, we'll have other challenges. But today, in my opinion, this is the right thing to do, and I support, of course, wholeheartedly the decision of the majority of the House of Commons, who represent all Canadians, and all 5 parties in general supported this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Benefit of the committee, I would like to tell you that the vote yesterday in the House was 219 to 79. Thank you. And we now have a second round, obviously. So we will begin with anyone there on the Conservatives. Mr. Maguire. Mr. Waugh. Oh. Who is it? Mr. Maguire, Mr. Waugh.
Mic's on.
Yes.
We'll share. Just to pick up on Mr. Sampson's point, we are a nation today. This has nothing to do with what heritage is today. Heritage comes from where we came from. And, you know, as a former school board trustee, I can tell you, we'll be changing this every 6 months if we were a nation today. I'm sorry, we have not consulted Canadians on this, Dr. Champion. We may have had a quick vote yesterday, and maybe some stood up from every party and accepted it, but I haven't consulted mine constituents. And, you know, I've done a little bit of it, and I can tell you, they need to be consulted, and they haven't been consulted in this. This is a major issue in this country as far as heritage is concerned. Comment on the situation here, because we are a nation today, and then we pick up history today. No, history dictates where we came from. And you pointed it out, 300-400 years ago, and getting this piece of national anthem.
Madam Chair, as I mentioned, there is a track record of this type of change to heritage in Canada, and it goes back many years to the middle of the 20th century. You know, historians' job is to explain why. I don't think that's been fully explained by Canadian historians. There are people working on that field. I mean, I've done a small contribution myself. But there's a pattern there, and the pattern is that it seems it's better not to consult Canadians because there could be a backlash. And it's better if people here keep it kind of to themselves and kind of rush it through because it's too much trouble to consult people. And probably there would be a large negative reaction if people really knew what we were doing in here. I think that's the simple answer.
Yeah, I'm concerned with native land. I'm concerned with the word God. These are changes that I can see after this bill, if it passes, those words will be under attack. Native land and God in our national anthem. I mean, we're going to be changing this every parliament. And that's not what heritage is all about. And I'm a little distressed about this, to be honest with you, because the Canadians that I talk to, I used to be a sportscaster, and in sports, you follow teams because of their history. It's not what they do today. In this country, there are several Montreal Canadian fans that will never change because of the history of that hockey club. And the same with the Toronto Maple Leafs. No matter what you do, they will never change because of history. And that's the same with this. We need to do a better job in our schools to explain where this came from. I am shocked because does this mean Shakespeare and Van Gogh, all these people that came before us, their work is useless now? I mean, this is where this is coming, and I'm very distressed about it.
Well, I think it's right, Madam Chair, that this change does. Now, it's a little change, as your colleague Ms. Bennett pointed out. She said in the House, these two words of us are small yet meaningful, and I agree, but not for the same reason. If you really believe in ending exclusivity, then you should have no national anthem at all, because by definition, a national anthem is exclusive of people who don't belong to the country or nation. The national anthem is about us, in the sense that it's not about Americans, Ecuadorians, or Sinhalese. So if you really believe it's exclusive to have an All Thy Sons command in our national anthem, then it might make sense to just let every Canadian sing the song of their choice. And you could have a kind of national jukebox, put your coin in and pick your tune. I think what this does, although it is a small change, it separates us in present-day Canada, and it has the arrogance of separating future generations who may not agree with us from their tradition, from their literary and poetic tradition.
Yes.
Mr. Waugh, you have 2 minutes. Okay, Mr. Maguire, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Waugh, and thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Dr. Campbell, for your presentation and your clarity in regards to what those words mean in our society today and have for, as you say, 100 years. Of course, I spoke on this and about some of the very things that you've said in regards to this matter in the House. And we have seen a very big rush put on this, as my colleague here, Mr. Van Loan, has indicated earlier. The bill hasn't been passed for 24 hours yet. It's appearing before us here and be voted on today to make a change immediately without Canadians being asked to have input into this, or they've been asked, but obviously I agree with my colleagues and the comments that you've made that most Canadians don't know it's being made, but because of some articles that have been printed in some areas of Canada, there has been some awareness of the issue. One of them is the home province that I'm come from, Manitoba, the Winnipeg Free Press. There have been articles, some small surveys done in I guess I don't know what the word is, the kind of surveys that have been done either on some of the radio shows or through questions. One that I've heard is that 90% of Canadians were not in favor of this change. 90-10 is quite an unusual ruling of the society that we have in Canada today. It involves virtually everyone. Some quotes that have come back from some folks that I'd just like to put on the record here as well and have you comment on. Paula S. says, I hate this controversy over the lyrics. About Canada, I feel we have a beautiful national anthem just the way it is. Shane S. says, what a total waste of time. People died for that anthem. You should all be ashamed. Shelley says, this is not about gender.
Mr.
Canadians
Waugh.
are certainly accepting
Mr.
of all
Maguire,
people.
sorry. We are now over 7 minutes, and as you know, our second round is usually 5. I've given leeway because of the nature of this, and we have only one witness. I've given leeway into a 7-minute round on our second round, but you're now 7:30.
I'll just finish that
Thank
then,
you.
Madam Chair.
Just-
No need to adjust historic song, beautiful as it is. Maybe you could comment on those at some other question.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Maguire. Now I have Mr. O'Regan for the Liberals.
Madam Chair, just a reminder to my colleagues that this bill was first tabled in the 41st Parliament, so there has been ample time to consult with Canadians on this. So with that in mind, I'd like to move on to the clause by clause, please.
Thank you. There is a motion on the floor to move to clause by clause. I will call the question unless there is
If I
debate.
could speak to that motion briefly.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Van Loon, I was about to suggest that people could speak to this motion, so maybe you will let me finish my statements. Thank you. So there is a debate or discussion on this motion to move to clause by clause. Go ahead, Mr. Van Loon.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. We have an agenda today that provides till 9:45 for this, and then we have another hour for clause by clause. As we've observed, this is not a long bill. We've already had a process that has not followed the rules of this committee, that has effectively shortened the opportunity for input from Canadians. We now have, through a miracle of the generosity of someone to come on virtually no notice, who's extraordinarily learned, has offered a great deal of thoughtful input to us, and I would say speaks for a great many Canadians. And now we have a motion to cut short that opportunity for public input even further. This is, to me, a staggering approach that achieves nothing except for the suppression of dissenting views. And I cannot understand a motion like this. It's not going to advance the process from today. We're talking about 15 more minutes for public input, and we are now have a motion from the Liberal Party to suppress those who wish to have a contrary view from having their 15 minutes to say that. I find that staggering, unfortunate, sad, but entirely consistent with the handling of this by the Liberal Party. With the greatest of respect, the member whose bill we are dealing with and the personal considerations we are taking into account for him, the last thing he would want would be for that legacy to be tainted by what has been happening. What happened at our last committee meeting, where we adopted a process in violation of our rules to shut down public input. This is an individual who ran for speaker, who held the totems of our democracy as important, and that, in an effort to rush his bill through, we are disgracing his respect for Parliament. It's the height of irony. But to me, it says a lot about the way the Liberal Party is approaching things, whether it be on this, the approach on democratic reform, where we're going to change our electoral system but will not give Canadians a say. There's a broader pattern taking place here. And I think this motion is unfortunate. I think we should vote against it. I urge you to vote against it and allow us to have a few more minutes to hear from this very capable and very high-quality witness.
Thank you, Mr. Van Loon. Speaking against the motion, is there anyone who wishes to discuss this motion? Then I shall call the question. Those in favour of the motion? To move to clause by clause? Those opposed? The motion is carried. We will now move to clause by clause. We will suspend for a minute to be able to get the legislative clerk involved.
Does that mean it has no closing statement? No? Okay.
To champion, witnesses are not allowed closing statements. Thank you. We shall begin.
Madam Chair, on a point of order,
Yes, Mr. Van Loan.
I have a couple of questions for the clerk of the committee. On May 3rd, this committee adopted the following order to govern all our business. And it says that in relation to orders of reference from the House regarding bills, the clerk of the committee shall, upon the committee receiving such an order of reference, write to each member who is not a member of a caucus represented on the committee to invite those members to file with the clerk of the committee in both official languages any amendments to the bill which is the subject of the said order which they would suggest that the committee consider. Has that rule of our process been followed? Have all those members been written to?
The clerk is answering, but I will allow him to answer himself.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Van Loan, it was done for independent members and members of the committee on Tuesday. It was sent.
The rules indicate, Madam Chair, that that should be done upon the committee receiving such an order of reference. Was it done upon the committee receiving the order of reference, which would have been last night?
Done before that, so there was a lot more
Yes,
time
but
for people to
it
respond.
must be done upon the committee receiving the order of reference. That is the rule that we have adopted here.
I gather that obviously when this was done the day before, given what was passed by this committee in terms of a motion, which we had passed not unanimously but by a majority, that in fact, if this were to be referred to the committee, that there should be, and the clerk acted on what the will of the committee was at that meeting on Tuesday, Mr. Van.
However, that does not change this rule. Can you tell me which independent members were written to?
All of them? All of them.
Who were all of them?
Mr. Van Loan, I think we all know who are the members of Parliament in this House. If the clerk says he wrote to all of them, then he did.
I'll be more
I don't think we should
specific.
have him.
Did you write to the member from Nunavut?
Members were sent
Including the member from Nunavut.
I gather he is a member of Parliament, Mr. Van Loan, and therefore, if the clerk says
I'm
he
asking
wrote
the
to
clerk to
all,
please answer. Did you write to the member of Nunavut?
Mr. Van Loan, I don't think that one should badger the clerk. He has said all members of the House of Commons, including independent members, were written to. It is my understanding that the member from Nunavut, you were at the meeting, Mr. Van Loan, and I understand you sent a list of witnesses to the clerk, so therefore you were well aware that this was coming to the House, and you were well aware of what the House decided on Tuesday. So all of the members of the House were written to, and so that would include the member from Nunavut.
Did that include the member from Nunavut?
It would include
Could I have the
all
clerk?
members, Mr. Well, we're going to.
I'm asking the clerk, not yourself.
The clerk did answer. He said he wrote to all members, including independent members. I don't know how else he can answer it, but reiterate his answer over and over.
Could he please say that? I didn't
Would
hear
you
it.
say that, please, Mr. Clerk? You wrote to all members?
Yes, to my knowledge, everybody was aware of...
Every member of Parliament, not just independents?
not every member of Parliament per se, every members of the
You wrote to
committee
every
and every independent
member,
Yes.
including the member of Nunavut. What does, I don't know what shrugging your shoulders means.
Yes.
You did write to the member for Nunavut.
Yes.
Okay, I would like you to provide that in the future, but I would point out that that order of reference was not to go until, that correspondence was not to go until we had received the order of reference. And then there was to be a 48-hour period for amendments to be filed. And we have not had 48 hours since the order of reference. And as such, I put it to you, we can't proceed to clause by clause at this time, which offers us an opportunity to hear from some of the witnesses we know would like to appear but are not here today. And we're not able to appear here today, including the grandson of Robert Stanley Weir, the actual composer who might have been able to answer some of the questions that people had today.
Mr. Van Loan, the clerk is indicating that 48 hours in the House is 2 sleeps.
it has not been 48 hours since we received an order of reference. Under the House rules, it has been 24 hours since we received an order of reference.
I will seek the advice of the legislative clerk here with regard to this. No.
I'll point out this is a special rule that was adopted by this committee at the request of the government.
I'm sorry, Mr. Van Loan. You may wish to proceed by saying it with orders of the government, but this committee made this decision on Tuesday that, in fact, we would study the bill on this day. And if you recall, at the end of the meeting, I suggested that if you said you had witnesses on Tuesday, that you would send them along, and you did. So obviously, this decision of this committee was observed. And therefore, we had said, if this is referred, we will deal with it on this day, and the committee agreed to this. So we have followed the will of the committee on this instance, including you, Mr. Van Loan, who, prior to the bill being referred to this committee, did send your list of witnesses. So it showed that you understood that this committee had ruled on this issue.
I understood that we had ruled that we would hear witnesses. However, it is quite clear that we need 48 hours time from reference for individuals, independent members, have an opportunity to submit amendments. That 48 hours has not been respected. I'll point out that we have already had an occasion where the consideration that took place today was done in violation of the rules, the vote having been put while I was still speaking on the floor without having had committee members hear the opportunity why I felt that members of the public would be denied the opportunity to appear. We now know that several members of the public who wanted to appear did not have the opportunity to appear. We've had that violation of the rules. We've had this witness's period of time that was on our agenda to discuss this cut short. And now we are proceeding again with yet another violation of the rules, is what I'm hearing proposed, that we proceed to clause by clause, notwithstanding that we aren't respecting the rules that this very committee has adopted. How many ways do we have to break the rules to jam this thing through? I told you that, I think I said quite clearly that when we think of the member who's sponsoring this bill, the very last thing he would have wanted was that we trample all over the rules of Parliament and this institution and what it means in order that this bill pass. That's a heck of a way to taint his legacy. I do not think it's what he had in mind.
Mr. Van Loan, I do not accept that you have the authority to speak on behalf of the member who moved this bill, so therefore
I don't. Nor does anybody who says that's why we have to move quickly.
Mr. Van Loan, do you agree that a duly passed motion by this committee that passes the committee is allowed to stand? This is what happened. The motion was passed. You actually did have an opportunity to make your points, Mr. Van Loan. You made them during that meeting, and you repeated yourselves, and one of the members said that this was repetitive and called for the question. Therefore, everyone agreed, the majority on this committee, that the question be called. The question was called. You, Mr. Van Loan, decided that you were not going to accept the will of the committee, and you continued to speak, and therefore, the chair's ruling, having been agreed on by the majority of the committee, was allowed to stand. And therefore, you, Mr. Van Loan, did not accept the will of this committee. We now have a question on the floor to move to clause by clause.
Madam Chair, with the greatest of respect, on the point of order.
I am sorry. On point of order, I am finishing my sentence. I am finishing my sentence,
okay.
Mr. Van Loan, whether you like it or not. So show some respect for the chair. Please. Now, I have finished my sentence. And what we had here was an agreement. The will of this committee was accepted. We had a motion to go to clause by clause. This was accepted by the majority of the committee. The majority of committee are now moving to clause by clause. Mr. Van Loan, I think you are going to have to start respecting the will of this committee as its majority rules. And therefore, by a vote of
Madam Chair, if I may speak, I would have appreciated the same respect from you when I was attempting to complete my sentence and you put the question at our last committee meeting. That is what Standing Order 116 provides. And with the greatest of respect, the will of the committee does not override the rules of Parliament, the standing orders of Parliament, the standing orders of this committee, nor the other rules that we have adopted here. Under your chairmanship, you are making a mockery of all our rules. This is simply a process where the majority gets to say what they want, throw every rule out the window. We did not adopt a motion to suspend the rules of the committee. No such motion has been adopted, but that is effectively what your chairmanship is doing.
I am sorry if you are challenging the chair once again. I will put the question to the committee that the chair's ruling stand.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Maguire, there is a motion on the table that the chair's ruling stand. Shall I call this question?
Madam Chair, with all due respect,
Mr. Van Loan is challenging the chair. He has said so in no uncertain terms.
Cannot proceed.
Do I get it that you are challenging the chair's ruling?
Yes, my view is that
Yes,
we
you
cannot
did
proceed at this time.
at the last meeting, and
Yes.
the committee ruled to have that the chair's ruling be sustained. We are now having you challenge the chair again. Is that true, Mr. Van Loan?
Yes, I believe
Yes,
we
and
cannot,
so the
we cannot
question-
proceed at this time with clause
The
by clause
question to
under
the
our
committee
rules.
would be, is the chair's ruling sustained? This motion passes. The chair's ruling is sustained. We will now continue with clause 1.
Madam Chair.
Clause 1
Madam Chair,
reads, yes, Mr. Maguire? You are speaking to clause 1 because that is the order of business now.
well, I have a new point of order then,
What is your point of order, Mr. Maguire?
and it is to the point that was tried to be made earlier about something our committee agreed to earlier in May in regards to that whole process of notifications, and I'd just like to put in a request for those notifications.
If I may remind Mr. Maguire, that with 48 hours notice, Mr. Van Loan tabled the list of witnesses with 48 hours notice. So he tabled those on Tuesday evening, and it is my understanding that that constitutes 48 hours. So now we will move to the
So, Madam
clause
Chair, am I
1.
led to believe I will not get the copies of the points that were sent out to the members of Parliament, to the independents as well?
Yes, you are again. I think this committee has ruled that we move on to the business of this
Well,
meeting.
I'm just going back to what we'd agreed to in early May.
On Tuesday, there was an agreement on this by this committee to move in a particular manner, and as a result, Mr. Van Loan tabled his witnesses 48 hours before this meeting. So that has been complied with, the 48 hours of tabling witnesses, and those witnesses were duly contacted, and we now have a witness come here as a result of that. So I will just move to first clause, the schedule to the National Anthem Act
Madam Chair.
is replaced by the schedule set out in the schedule to this act.
Madam Chair, just a point of clarification then. What I'm seeking will not change the outcome of the votes, I'm sure, in regards to going through clause by clause on this bill, the outcome of it. I'd just like to have clarification and notification that the rules that we had agreed to in early May were properly followed. So thank you.
Well, I said indeed that 48 hours notice of witnesses were given by Mr. Van Loan on Tuesday. I think Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, that was 48 hours. And the clerk immediately contacted the witnesses when he got Mr. Van Loan's tabling of the list of witnesses. Mr. Van Loan was the only person who tabled any witnesses from all the members of this committee, and they were duly contacted 48 hours before today, Thursday. So thank you, Mr. Maguire.
Yeah, and I know that we've clarified that many of them couldn't get here on the short notice. I'm only following the rule that it hasn't been 24 hours yet since the bill was reported, and that's all I was wanting to reference to us. And
yes,
so that's all I was pointing out in regards to making sure that our committee has followed all the proper rules, which it has not.
The committee decided on Tuesday that it would move to a different set of agreements, that for various reasons that this will be discussed today. The committee, the majority agreed to this. We are now going by what the majority, as a chair, I go with what the majority of my committee tells me to do, and that is what we are currently doing right now.
Madam Chair, if I can, I would also like to express, the time that we didn't have, the 48 hours, of course. It's only been less than 24 hours since we voted on this. The other one I'm very disappointed in is we had a slate this morning from 8:45 to 9:45, and we get cut off for our only witness that we brought here today.
Mr. Waugh, I would remind you that in the first round, when I went to the next member after Mr. Van Loan had spoken for the Conservatives, the next member on the order was the New Democratic Party. Mr. McGregor decided he had no questions.
The first time you did, you never asked him about the second time, though.
Obviously, if Mr. McGregor can speak for himself, but if Mr. McGregor said he had no questions, I assume that being the only member of his party at this table, that he still did not have any questions.
You don't know that for sure, Madam Speaker.
Mr. McGregor, did I cut you off? Did you have a question?
with respect, Mr. Waugh, I didn't have any follow-up questions.
Thank you very much. And then I turned to the next on that list, and that was meant to be the Liberals, and Mr. O'Regan was the person who said he wanted to say something. He moved a motion. This committee voted the majority to move to clause by clause because he had no other questions. Mr. Sampson had no questions. So I think we are following what I am hearing from the members of committee with regard to questions. And therefore, we will now...
well, Madam Chair, just to that.
Yes, and in fact, after the Liberals had no questions, we moved to you and Mr. Maguire and Mr. Waugh. I actually gave you, on a 5-minute round, 7 minutes and 30 seconds. So you were given due time to at least have your questions in that order answered. And then the next person, Mr. McGregor, did not have any questions. So we moved through what this committee agreed was going to be the questioning order. And that is what happened.
Well, Madam Chair, Madam Chair, if I could, just to that. It's the same. It's just to that same issue. I have no problem with that. The fact that you know, if you gave us 7.5 minutes, that's fine. Then we were done that round of questions. If no one else had any other questions, obviously I wasn't finished. I never got an answer to the question that I asked because we were cut off in that time frame. I could have had another 20 minutes. There was 20 minutes left of this committee's work. If no one else had 20 minutes of questions, I certainly did. And I was, we were cut off. So I appreciate that.
Mr. Maguire, you are on this committee, that you know the committee has agreed that for every witness we have 2 rounds, a 7-minute round and a 5-minute round. We did have a 7-minute round, and we then had a 5-minute round. And as I said before, I allowed you and Mr. Waugh to have 7 minutes instead of 5, so you were given an extra 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Those are the 2 rounds. There are no further rounds when we have witnesses. There was no discussion as to whether we should have further rounds. It was always 2 rounds. This is what we agreed to on the very first day that this committee was constituted. So being that there were no other witnesses, we now moved on. By the way, I wanted to suggest that we do have a clause by clause on the floor.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Van Loan.
It has come to my attention that some information provided to the committee previously by the clerk was not accurate. The clerk has let us know that the member for Nunavut was not provided with notice, because at the time he was provided with notice, he was not an independent. However, at the time of the order of reference, he was indeed an independent. And as such, we cannot proceed at this time until 48 hours have passed.
Yes, Mr. Burson.
That's your ruling, Mr. Van Loon? Sorry? Is that your ruling?
I'm informing you of the rules of Parliament. I know for the Liberals on that side, it's rather casual. The rules of what we've adopted and so on seem to be things just to be trampled if we wanted to get something through. However, Madam de Bruson moved such a rule. We adopted it. We are bound by it. And I come from a tradition where we follow the rules. I come from the tradition where the rules are what make democracy work. They are what protect the rights of the minority. They are what allow people to be heard. We have been trampling them at every instance here, and now we have another example where that's being proposed to have happen.
Madam Chair, can we do clause by clause?
Excuse me, I would like to respond to the question on the honourable member for Nunavut. As you well know, the honourable member for Nunavut became an independent only a short time ago. He still has an opportunity before report stage to be able to submit in writing anything that he wishes to say.
That is not what the rules of this committee provide, however.
He has the opportunity
That
to
is
do
not what the rules of this committee provide. The rules of this committee provide that he must be given 48 hours notice, an opportunity to present his views. And in fact, all members, I would submit it's 48 hours after the notice of reference. You can make an argument about the others. You can make no argument whatsoever in this case. And to say that we can break our rules because someone has a remedy that we're ignoring them and they have another remedy in the House is not following our rules. And you are
the member from
proposing what
Nunavut
you're saying to break our rules.
is grateful for the member's concern. Can we move on to clause by clause, please?
Thank you. There is a vote by this committee to move on to clause by clause.
Madam Chair, I would like to have that matter.
I would like to point out to the committee
in view of the new information, I would like to have that matter
Mr. Van
reconsidered
Loon
by
could
the.
speak to this issue on the.
Could we hear
clause
from the
by
legal
clause
clerk on it in view of the new facts? The legislative
Do
clerk.
we have our legal analyst here? Legal opinion. is that indeed the committee had decided that this would be dealt with on Thursday, that as I had reiterated again, this was decided on Tuesday. That was 48 hours. Everyone was aware of that 48 hours. The point is that we now have the committee, again, as a majority, asking to proceed with clause by clause. They voted duly on this, and we are going to have to obey the will of this committee on how we proceed. The committee has decided to proceed with clause by clause, notwithstanding your objections, Mr.
Madam
Van
Chair,
Loon.
we have a new piece of information,
and so I would like us to deal with the first clause.
that your ruling in the context of the new piece of information should be revisited. So I would challenge it in the context of the new information received
First
by the
clause,
committee.
Madam Chair.
It's
No,
a clear
no.
breach of the rules, and if we break all our rules, this is a very dangerous precedent.
Mr. Van Loon, the committee can decide how it proceeds, and the committee has decided how it would proceed.
The
And
committee
so
can
you may
decide how
not
it
agree.
proceeds.
The majority of the committee has decided on this procedure, and we will now
Clause, Madam
move to
Chair.
the first clause. Yes, anyone speaking to the first clause?
Madam Chair, with the greatest of respect, the majority rules. It doesn't make the rules over the rules unless it makes the rules. The rules bind. To suspend the rules requires unanimous consent. To suspend the rules in the House of Commons requires unanimous consent. To suspend the rules here at committee requires unanimous consent. We now have clear evidence that the rules are not being followed, yet you are saying a mere majority can suspend those rules. If we have a mere majority can suspend all the rules, what is happening is exactly what I have said. That this is
Madam Chair, the member's repeating himself. The majority's ruled. Can we move on to the first clause?
We have a new ruling on the floor in the context of the new
on to the
information
first clause,
that
Madam Chair?
notwithstanding that the notice was not
The
given
member is
to one of the
repeating
members.
himself. Can we move on to the first clause?
Before we were told that one of the members had received notice. Now we know that one of the members had not received notice.
As we've heard
We have a clear
before, can we
violation of the
move
rules.
on to the first clause?
Now, I will, the schedule to the national anthem was voted on by this committee. I will go to clause 1, which says the schedule to the National Anthem Act is
Just to my
replaced
point,
by the
which has
schedule
nothing to do
set
with the
out
one you were
in the
talking about,
schedule to
Madam
this
Chair.
act. Are there
I
any
have
amendments?
never seen a committee. I've been on many committees over there. I am vice chair of this committee, and your ruling in regards to what I was talking about, having 20 minutes of questions left in this for the witness that came, Madam Chair, there is no, when a time frame is set out for an hour of questions in a committee like that, I have never seen it cut off at 2 rounds. Most of them go to 3 and 4 if there are no other questions. So I just wanted on the record to make sure that we know that this that we still had more questions. Obviously, we didn't even get an answer to the one that we'd asked.
Mr. Maguire.
And so I just think that it needs to be on the floor here. We're automatically, or we're dealing with something before this committee right now that isn't legislatively allowed under parliamentary rules. And that should be clear.
The committee makes
with all
decisions.
I would like to
best
actually look
wishes
at
of my
Schedule 1
colleagues
because I'm
across
quite
the way,
interested in it, and I believe that that is where we were at.
they have
and
not
it is
been referenced,
important.
Madam
And
Chair.
as a woman, I would
The
appreciate
member
to
from
not be
Nunavut did
spoken
not get it,
over again.
and it's come up since. That has
Maguire,
changed
you
since we
put
made
a-
our ruling the other day.
You put forward a question to the chair, and I am responding once again, as I am going to be responding for the 3rd time. We went into the second round. In the first round, no Liberal wanted to ask a question. The NDP did not wish to ask a question. We went into the second round, which is normally a 5-minute round. I allowed that second round to be a 7-minute round. The first order was Conservatives. You got 7 minutes and 30 seconds. When we moved to the next Liberal, that Liberal used his time to place a motion on the floor. We dealt with the motion. The motion was duly voted on. The new Democratic Party member, who should have been the next after the Liberals, said he did not have a question. And therefore, we are now moving to the order of the day, which is a motion was duly passed by the majority of this committee to move to clause by clause. And now I will do so.
Well, Madam Chair, I will
You
respond to that.
challenging the chair's ruling? Say so, and we will put it to a vote.
I am challenging the chair's ruling
Yes.
because we had new information. I indicated that to you, that we had new information that we did not have at the previous time.
And
We now have a clear case of that rule of this committee not being followed. We now have the information that the member for Nunavut was
Mr.
not
Van Dal,
informed.
absolutely
please
no
speak.
information.
Mr. Van Dal, please speak
The
through
clerk,
the chair.
the clerk has now provided us with information that the member for Nunavut was not given notice after the order of reference from the House of Commons. That is required. That means we cannot proceed. Our rules are not being followed. And I am challenging the chair on her view that we should proceed with it, notwithstanding that violation of the rules.
You are challenging the chair. I think that you have brought forward, and everyone around this table, Mr. Van Loan, has heard you suggest that you reject the ruling of the chair because of the fact that the member from Nunavut was not contacted 48 hours before.
I call the question.
Everyone around this table, Mr. Sampson, everyone around this table has agreed that they will proceed anyway. So if you wish, I will call, the question is already called. We are now moving to the orders of the day. The schedule to the National Anthem Act is replaced by the schedule
Madam Chair,
set
there
out
is
in
one
the
thing that
schedule
needs
to
to be
this.
clarified
Are
yet, and I
there
have a question
any
for the clerk to do that.
Mr. DeBruson?
Madam Chair, I have
Madam-
a question to the clerk.
Mr.
I have no
Maguire.
amendments to
This
propose.
is very much to the rules of the committee
Yes,
and
Mr.
a new
Maguire,
point of
you
view.
may ask the clerk a question.
Totally view.
And
Yeah.
then I am proceeding to the orders of the day.
Thank you.
And you have challenged the chair if I
Well,
will
how can you
call a
do that,
question
Madam
to
Chair, when you
say,
don't know what my
is
question
the
is?
chair's ruling sustained? Go ahead, Mr. Maguire. I will allow you to ask
Thank you,
the
Madam
clerk a
Chair.
question.
I'd just like to ask the clerk if he thinks that, if he can inform us as to whether this committee has to have unanimous consent to suspend the committee rules.
Miss, I will allow the clerk to answer.
I think, shouldn't we be? If I may comment, there's a presumption in there that there has been a suspension of the rules when in fact there had been a motion passed at the last meeting with an agreement.
I think I have repeated that over and over. What we have are members who do not wish to accept the ruling of this committee and we proceed to decide that they will make the rules themselves and ignore the committee. The committee has the authority. The committee has the authority to decide how we will proceed. Mr. Van Loan, you continue to speak over the chair, and I will not allow that to happen any further. Now, as a chair, I am saying that this committee decided by majority last Tuesday that we will proceed in this manner. That was 48 hours ago. You brought up the question of the member from Nunavut. The committee heard it. The committee continues to agree that we should proceed to the orders of the day, which is to deal with clause by clause. Now, you asked the clerk a question. The clerk will answer your question, and I will then move to orders of the day.
Just before he does that,
You
Madam
have
Chair.
asked a question, Mr. Maguire. Will you allow the clerk to answer?
Sure.
It?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. McGuire, for the question. We in fact have a motion stating what is required to in how to proceed in terms of dealing with a clause-by-clause study when we have a bill. Although all of this motion has been adopted, as Mr. Randall rightly said, we have at the end, if you go at the end of the motion on point B, we say as well at the very end, last sentence, provided that the committee may, by motion, vary this deadline in respect of a given bill, and it goes on. So we've adopted to go to the clause by clause on Thursday, which makes, in this case here, a difference.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I guess the only thing that I have is I have no problem with the ruling that we made the other day. We did, with our objection, pass that clause, and I have no question about that. All I'm asking is, but that did not force, that does not forego the rules of Parliament. And all I'm asking here is, does this committee, does it have to? Are we having to? Can the clerk tell us clearly, then, if this committee needs unanimous support to suspend the rules of Parliament?
This committee is actually on a bill.
The rules of the committee, pardon me.
That is dealing with the rules of the committee, and the rules of the committee is based on the decisions made by the committee, which was a majority decision on Tuesday, 48 hours ago, to deal with this bill today. We know that Mr. Van Loan, although he disagreed with the ruling, did give his list of witnesses with 48 hours notice to the committee. The clerk responded. Currently, the clerk has told you that, in fact, we should proceed with the decision of this committee now.
I have a clarification to make.
Clarification?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. McGuire. Just to, in order of just absolutely clarify the situation about the member of Nunavut, at the time, I was not aware of his official independent situation. I have right here in front of me information from Journals Branch, which is the official management of all the decisions on all the information from Parliament. And I just have the email now that at 1:16 p.m. yesterday, we had been confirmed that Mr. Tutu was now an independent member. So the email regarding all the information for potential amendments to be sent was sent prior to that. So at the time that it was sent,
But of course,
I didn't have that information. I'm sorry if it led to.
I do not fault you for that. It's just that the rules state that upon receiving an order of reference, that is the trigger point for determining who independents are, and that, of course, was well after 1:16 p.m. yesterday.
Mr. Van, yes, Ms. On a point of order, Mr. President?
No, I'd like to proceed to the clause by clause, because we have gone around this several times. We have amended by motion at our last meeting.
We are actually going to be guided by what the clerk of the committee is telling us that the rules are. And so the clerk of the committee said that he was aware yesterday at 1 p.m. or 1:30 p.m. that the status of the honourable member from Nunavut had changed. However, when the clerk also informed everyone, the honourable member from Nunavut was still a member of a political party and therefore received the notices as all members did. So what is happening here is that this is really not something to be considered. He received it at the time that everyone else did. We know that the honourable member from Nunavut at that time was still a member of a political party.
That's not what the rules say, Madam.
So now I shall move to clause by clause.
Madam Chair, just for clarification.
We will now go with
just for clarification, then I want to note that Mr. Tutu did not receive the proper notification after he became an independent.
Pardon? With the rules, but he also was a member of a political party when the chair sent out the notices. Because we know that one of the members of this committee was fully aware on Tuesday and sent in his list of witnesses as required under the rules.
Well, Madam Chair, I
so
think
that
the
at
key
that
word
time,
there is
Mr. Tutu was still a member of a political party.
And he
Madam
has
Chair,
not received since the reference.
Madam Chair, this is the best role of repetition I've ever heard. So I think I call the question. It's been there. Let's deal with this, please.
I'm calling
Madam Chair,
clause by clause.
just to Mr. Sampson's
This committee has
comment.
agreed to proceed under clause by clause.
Just to Mr. Sampson's comment, it's very good that we've done this because it's made it very clear, even more so because of our insistence on following the rules, that Mr. Tutu was not notified after he became an independent, which is the rules of Parliament. Notwithstanding what we passed the other day, he was a member of Parliament with the Liberal Party at that time. He is not anymore. And so therefore, I'm just clarifying the fact that he did not receive the notice after 1:16 yesterday when he was notified by the government that he was an independent member of the House. That's all I'm saying.
I will make a ruling as a chair that, in fact, I think that in all good faith, at the time that the clerk sent out information to all members, that the honourable member for Nunavut was a member of a political party at the time. And so I believe that the clerk and this committee did what it was supposed to do in all good faith, and I will now move to
I'm
clause
only
by
concerned,
clause.
Madam Chair, that
So
as
I
Vice
will-
Chair of the committee that
I
we're breaking the
will
rules of
speak,
precedent
Mr.
of Parliament
Ms.
that could be
Maguire,
used in any other
you
committee in
have
the
heard-
future.
Mr. Maguire, I think you are now out of order. You have heard the ruling of the chair. If you are challenging the ruling of the chair, do so, and I will put to this committee whether the chair's ruling is sustained or not. Are you challenging the chair?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank
I
you.
challenge
Now-
the Chair in regards to the fact that Mr. Tutu was not notified after he became an independent member according to the rules of the House of Commons.
Now, the chair is ruling that the chair believes that all due process was followed and that, in fact, we move to the orders of the day, which is to deal with clause by clause. I will put this question. We have a question
That wasn't my challenge,
chair,
Madam Chair.
the motion on the floor, therefore, is that the chair's ruling be sustained. Do I have a vote on this motion? Yes, so there's a majority who is actually sustaining the ruling of the chair, and I will now move to the first clause, which reads, the schedule to the National Anthem Act is replaced by the schedule set out in the schedule to this act. Are there any amendments? Is there any discussion or amendments to be placed on this clause?
Madam Chair, I'd just like,
Right, I hear none, and so
can I get
shall
a
move
clarity
to...
on regards to
Clause
future
1 be
committees of
carried?
this Parliament in regards to the unanimity of my original question? I'd like clarification from the clerk that we have met all the rules of this committee for unanimity.
There's a motion on the floor,
forward.
Mr. Maguire. I think the clerk has clarified, I have clarified. The committee has agreed to sustain the chair's ruling, and we will now call the vote on shall clause
Well, you are
1
moving forward
be
without
carried.
clarity.
Could I speak to the motion,
Those
please?
in favour?
Could I speak to the clause, please?
Clause 1 be carried.
Could I speak to the clause,
Do you
please?
have
Time for voting.
Speaking to the clause.
Yes, Mr. Van Loon, has he? Should speak to the clause. He's
was not
following the
speaking-
order of the day, which is that clause 1. Shall clause 1 carry?
I was not speaking because my friend was seeking to have the floor and you were ignoring him. This clause, of course, is the essence of what we're doing. It replaces the national anthem with the attached. I think it is tragic that this is being done in a fashion where Canadians are being shut out. Their national anthem is being changed. They have been singing it for decades, millions of Canadians. It belongs to them. It is not a plaything of us, nor is this committee a plaything of us. And I think it's an alarming signal to Canadians that in dealing with our most significant national symbols, we're willing to 3 times now breach our rules, do it twice in a fashion that suppresses any dissent whatsoever. Our national symbols in a free and democratic country are being changed by a vote of the majority, but more importantly, on the process side of things, a vote of the majority that has suppressed dissenting or contrary views. A vote of the majority that we should proceed with virtually no notice to Canadians to committee hearings. There would be only one opportunity to be a witness, and no Canadians knew of this because it was happening so quickly. That notwithstanding that we had been in contact with people who wanted to appear as witnesses when those witnesses lists were provided, because we were dealing with essentially 36 hours notice, if you will, less than that for some of them, of when they would appear. They were not able to obviously rearrange their affairs in such a fashion as to come here. We do that on nothing else. We do that on no other bills. And here we are doing it on something that is symbolic, that belongs to all Canadians, that is supposed to be a celebration of our democracy, of our freedom, of our traditions, of what it means to be Canadians. And what are we showing them? We're showing them that what it means to Canadians is, if I've got more votes than you, if I'm a bigger bully, if I have 39% of the vote, I can impose my will and suppress all dissent on the things that belong to you Canadians. And people have different views. I was part of a government that proposed changing these rules, these words. And the reason this matters to me so much is because we had a process. We floated it to Canadians in a throne speech. We signaled to them that this is where we wish to go. And we did it in a high-profile fashion that allowed them the opportunity to hear about it, to be fully aware of it, and to respond. And their response was strong and clear. While I was persuaded at the time of the merits of Thou Dost in Us command as a return to our histories and traditions, Canadians didn't share that view, for better or worse. I was big enough to accept that. I was big enough to listen to Canadians. I was big enough to understand that notwithstanding we had a majority, and we could have indeed imposed our will had we wished to, that perhaps Canadians were telling us something very important. Perhaps they were saying, let's not change these symbols lightly. Let's not impose it in a top-down way. And yet, that is exactly what we are doing here. In this free and democratic country, we're telling Canadians, guess what? You don't have a say in your national anthem. It belongs to us as politicians. It belongs to us for us to deliver our worldview to you and impose it upon you. And whatever the merits of that, and as I said, I was sold on the merits of that some time ago. But what persuaded me was consultation, listening, hearing from Canadians that they had a different view, and valuing that different view. What I have seen here is a display that does not value the views of others. We think we are right. Not only will we rush things through so others cannot tell us something different, when they do come to this table to tell us something different, we will move a motion to shut down their ability to tell us that for another 15 minutes. It won't change the outcome today, but it is a very powerful symbol, of how this is being done and what that means. And when that powerful symbol of the erosion of the legitimacy of people's dissenting views is being held up, and that's happening at the same time as we're dealing with the national anthem and our freedom, I can understand why every single member of the opposition on that side is holding their head down. Because it is shameful. It is shameful to do it in such a fashion that Canadians can't have their say. We have an obligation, I think, to give them that opportunity, to consult, to hear, to let them have their say, and not to break the rules 3 times over, as we have now done, to ignore the rules 3 times over, as we have now done, in a rush to achieve what we want. I've said what I've said about the member who's sponsoring this bill. He ran for Speaker of Parliament, not because he wanted the ability to sit in that chair and break the rules to get his way. It was because he valued the institution. I've served here now many more years than I ever expected to when I was first elected in 2004. But in that time, I've appreciated that it is the rules in our democratic institutions, however stodgy and however frustrating this may be for those who want to get things done, and I was one of those who wanted to get things done for quite some time, that those exist for a reason. They exist for a reason that is the democratic process sometimes requires reflection. When we first proposed this change, and I supported it at that time, we allowed that process to unfold and we listened to Canadians. And my views were changed, not because of my own personal views being changed, but because I feel that when I'm here representing my constituents and representing Canadians, what they say and what they feel matters. We are doing a double disservice to them, I believe, with the change in substance, because I believe it is not in accord with what changes want, but secondly, in the way and the fashion in which we are doing so. Short-circuiting, suppressing dissent at every turn. This is sad, and to do so in the case of our national anthem, which is what we are proposing to do right here, is unfortunate. It is a sad day, and I regret it.
Alone. Any further discussion on amendments to the first clause? Hearing none, I will now ask whether Clause 1. Shall Clause 1 carry? No. Yes. Those in favour, please raise your hands. Those opposed? Yes. Can we have a recorded vote? There's a question for recorded vote. Well, we shall begin. Please, Mr. Breton, how do you vote?
Oui.
Yes, I'm in favour. Mr. Breton? Yes, indeed.
Oui, en faveur.
Mr. O'Regan?
Oui.
Mr. Sampson?
Oui, en faveur.
Monsieur Vandat?
En faveur.
Mr. McGuire?
No.
Mr. Van Loan?
No.
Mr. Waugh?
No.
Mr. McGregor?
I vote yes.
This is carried with a vote of 6-3 in favour of the clause. And so I shall now move to the next question. Shall the schedule carry? Do you wish a recorded vote on this one?
It's your chance to get your words in.
Madam Chair, I would like to speak to this as well, just to take a moment to reflect on what has been done here. As I said earlier, this will not change the outcome of the vote today in this bill, but I am most concerned, not just because I'm vice chair of the committee, but also as a regular parliamentarian, that we have circumvented the rules of the House in regards to the whole process. And this is about process. As I said in my speech in the House, I have the greatest respect for the member that moved this forward. Mr. Belanger is a very credible member of Parliament. and if he wants to put this type of thing forward, he's quite willing to do that. But I would suggest as well that because of the circumstances that he has faced, which is very unfortunate, Madam Chair, that even his own colleagues have not taken his respect for Parliament into consideration. And I believe that because of a precedent that's been set here now, with the member from Nunavut not receiving the proper notice since he became an independent member, and that's been clarified, that, I think he would have been the last one to have wanted to see this. I mean, it makes the difference between now and Tuesday, when you might have got a few more witnesses that would have been able to come, and Madam Chair, that they weren't able to come because of the quickness of this committee. And I want to say that we didn't get the opportunity to finish the questions. We had another 20 minutes. We do agree to agendas in this committee. And the agenda before us states 8:45 to 9:45 for witnesses today. We had one witness. We were cut off 20 minutes early. We had the second hour of every 2 hour. Every committee's virtually 2 hours, unless we finalize the business early. Madam Chair, there was a full outline on the clause-by-clause consideration here. It's very clear that it's on the agenda from 9:45 to 10:45. And as I said, it will not change the outcome of the whole process if we'd have waited that extra 20 minutes to get to the second portion of our meeting. But because of our insistence on clarity, Madam Chair, it has been now clarified that Mr. Tutu was the member from Nunavut, didn't receive proper notification under the rules of Parliament, and because we did not have unanimity of consent to suspend the committee's rules of this House to agree with the rules of Parliament, Madam Chair, I'm sure that the member that put this forward would be, who has been pointed out, was wanting to be the Speaker. Madam Chair, all parties agreed to a unanimous day in the House to allow him to be an honorary Speaker in the House. That has never happened before, Madam Chair, and so with the greatest respect, we all respect him as an individual. And so therefore, I just wanted on the record, Madam Chair, that I believe that we are proceeding without proper process in regards to this meeting being held today, and as much as maybe another 20 minutes of questions may not have changed the outcome, I think it's really unfair that I don't know whether the next 4 days will make any difference or not. We could have come back on Tuesday and heard more witnesses, Madam Chair, and this would have still been the same. The outcome of the bill would have been probably the same in regards to how the government votes on it. That's their right. We have no problem with the democratic process of them following and voting for it as they would. Madam Chair, I just have a real concern here that we've set a precedent for all future committees of Parliament, and I'm very concerned about that. And I think that the member putting the bill forward would have been concerned about it as well. So I think I'll leave it at that, Madam Chair. There were many, many other comments that I had, quotes from people in Canada, as I indicated. The vast majority of the people in my riding and many others, and particularly, as I even pointed out, in the city of Winnipeg, it was 90 to 10 in one survey that was taken against the change in this bill, Madam Chair. So we certainly didn't have I would imagine on issues of national significance like this, many committees would have traveled across the country and held public hearings to get feedback on something like this. That wasn't even an offer on the table from the committee, Madam Chair, and notwithstanding the situation, I think it would have been probably a wise move to have had an opportunity to educate Canadians that this was taking place. Many of them, as pointed out by our witness today, wouldn't even know that this was taking place, Madam Chair, unless they follow the daily goings-on in committees or in Parliament. And so I think that, we had an historian here today before us in committee, made some extremely valid and comments in regards to the arrogance of the government moving forward the way they have. Even one of my colleagues from across the way even indicated that today's decision will be future history. Madam Chair, and that's very true. But it was also pointed out that, this is a precedent that was done in some other areas as well. Dominion Day changed to Canada Day, 13 members in the House, sneaky process, I think was the words that was used. Anxiety that this may cause, quick and dirty were the comments that came from our witness today. And he was only saying that because Canadians don't know about the process. And I think that that's a grave nature of why we are why this has been forced upon us in such a very short time, Madam Speaker. And so I will leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Maguire. I think, Mr. Waugh, you wish to speak to this?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Madam Speaker. A number of us around this table are first-time parliamentarians. A lot of us don't really understand a lot of the rules in the House. We're learning as we go. I think that's a fair assessment when I look around. I was one of those. I received a phone call from the honourable member that is moving this bill. I received one in November. I just want to share, Madam Speaker. I wasn't home at the time. I was flying back from Ottawa to Saskatoon, my home riding. The honourable member, Belanger, phoned my house. He was trying to get votes to become Speaker of this House. My wife answered. My wife just retired as a school teacher and really isn't up on parliamentary procedures at all. Anyways, who are you? What are you trying to do? Explain to me. Mr. Belanger, who was trying to reach out to 337 more parliamentarians to get the vote to become Speaker of this House, took over an hour on the phone with my wife, explaining who he is, where he's come from, and the procedure of Parliament. We had a nonpartisan vote. There was many that were phoning our house. He happened to be the first. And to spend over an hour with my wife on the phone explaining the procedures. And as he was talking to my wife, his voice became weaker and weaker. And I know when I eventually came home that night, as I arrived at the Saskatoon airport at 11:30 at night, and I had a message to phone him. Here's the number, here's the cell number. Well, I didn't think at 1:30 in the morning I should phone Mr. Belanger. But I did phone him the next morning very early, about 5 o'clock my time, which would have been 6 down here. And lo and behold, he answered the phone. And we had another hour conversation about the process. As many of you know, we just went through the longest, historical, really, the longest campaign in history of this country, in modern day history. And a lot of us don't know the procedures when you first step into the House. And then we've seen this here today in the last couple of days, and we're all going to go back to our offices and ask some questions. I know I am. I have some very experienced staff, and I'm sure many of you are going to go back to your offices after this meeting and ask, what the hell happened? You know, because Parliament, it's become clear to me, as a broadcaster for 40 years, you think you know it all. And then you become a school board trustee, you know a little bit of governance. And I know many of you have been trustees or administrators, and you've moved on to municipal elections, but this is a higher calling, and we've seen that in this House. So, Madam Speaker, you know, you try to consult, and you know what? You've echoed those statements for the last 7 months. You want to consult with Canadians. We didn't have the chance to consult properly on this bill. And I just share with my colleagues those 2 phone calls that the mover of this bill, maybe one of the biggest bills that we'll have to deal with some of our parliamentarian history. I just wanted to share with you those 2 phone calls, one to my wife, and then the next day, Saturday, when I talked to Mr. Belanger about House leader. He wanted to be the Speaker of the House. And he talked to me in great length about how Parliament is at a higher calling. And I think this was televised here today. And I just hope coast to coast to coast, people have seen that their democracy hasn't been heard on this bill. And it's too bad, because whether this proceeds or not, we understand yesterday it got voted to another reading, which is fine. But at the same time, when you sit across and you hear you want to consult on this, you want to consult on that, I think it's fair to say that we did not consult on this one very much. And as we each head back to our ridings, I think you're going to hear this from Canadians. We're coming up to Canada Day, July 1st. All of us will be back in our ridings, hopefully, giving the word to your constituents on Canada Day. And you're going to hear a lot from constituents. What happened? Why was this rushed through 3 to 4 weeks ago? And I just want to share my experience with the mover of this bill and the procedure of Parliament, because most Canadians don't understand the procedures. And us as new parliamentarians, and there's many as I look across, are first-time parliamentarians, 6, 7 months in. We have broken some of the rules here today of Parliament. And I hope we all go back to our offices and have a deep consultation with our experienced staff members, if you do, and make sure this never happens again. This is a procedure that we had one of the top historians in the country, whether you agreed with his views or not. It was just a great insight what Mr. Champion had to say here today. Unfortunately, I had 45 minutes. It was called for an hour long. Another 15 minutes wouldn't have hurt this community or this committee to hear him. Whether we agreed, like I said, with his views or not, it was just, he talked about history, where this national anthem came from. So, Madam Speaker, I just want on the record, I'm as a first-time parliamentarian, 6, 7 months in, I'm really disappointed in this process. And I was disappointed more than one, because I thought this Heritage Committee, when I first came here, was going to work together. And I think we have on the media. I think we all sat down and agreed that we were going to work on what is happening in the media. And then all of a sudden we got derailed on a simple procedure like this. And that's not right. This committee has been hailed by many parliamentarians here as the one that has been working together more than any other. And now it's been derailed for what's happened this past week. And it's shameful, Madam Speaker, because whether it's Mr. Nantel, we've enjoyed one another. Many of my Liberal colleagues, we meet at heritage events, and we all have agreed we've really enjoyed this. But why did we rush this? You know, now we've derailed. You know, consenting views. We didn't have to do this. Just another consultation is all we needed, because this Heritage Committee deserves that. We started off very well, as I mentioned, in the fall, but I'm fearful where this committee is going following this member's bill that we presented here in the House today. And I feel for the independent member from Nunavut. It's interesting because we've all heard his issues, and one of our colleagues has gone through that issues. And maybe some of us know others that have gone through those issues. And just to leave him out of this process, to me, is we're not thinking of the 338 parliamentarians that we bring together in the House. And that's all I'll say on this matter.
Thank you, Mr. Waugh. And so I will now call the question. Shall the schedule carry? Those in favour, did you wish to have a recorded vote?
Please.
Clerk.
Monsieur Breton? Oui. Mr. Brusen?
Oui, en faveur.
Mr. O'Regan? Oui, en faveur. Monsieur Sanson?
En faveur.
Monsieur Vandal?
En faveur.
Mr. McGuire?
No.
Mr. Van Loon?
No.
Mr. Waugh?
No.
Mr. McGregor?
I vote yes.
This motion, not the motion, but yes, the motion carries by a vote of 6 to 3. The next question is, shall the title carry? Yes, Mr. Van Loon. Recorded vote.
Monsieur Breton?
En faveur.
Mr. Brusen?
Yes, in favor.
Mr. O'Regan,
Oui, en faveur.
Mr. Sanson,
Oui, en faveur.
Mr. Vandal,
In favor?
Mr. McGuire,
No.
Mr. Van Loo,
No.
Mr. Waugh,
No.
Mr. McGregor,
Yes.
By a vote of 6 to 3, the motion is carried. And shall the bill carry?
Recorded vote, please.
Mr. Breton, Mr. Brusin,
Yes, in favor.
Mr. O'Regan,
Yes.
Mr. Sanson,
En faveur.
Mr. Vandal,
Favor?
Mr. McGuire,
No.
Mr. Van Loo,
No.
Mr. Waugh,
No.
Mr. McGregor,
Oui.
Again, the motion is carried 6 to 3. Then shall the chair report the bill to the House?
Recorded, please.
Mr. Breton,
Faveur.
Mr. Brusin,
Oui, en faveur.
Mr. O'Regan,
Yes, in favor.
Mr. Sanson,
Oui, en faveur.
Mr. Vandal,
Oui, en faveur.
Mr. McGuire,
No.
Mr. Van Loo,
No.
Mr. Waugh,
No.
Mr. McGregor,
Oui.
Thank you very much to the committee. I shall be reporting this to the House as requested by the committee. Thank you very much, everyone.